Hi, and welcome everyone to IDC Directions 2021. It's a great pleasure to be here. My name is Tom Zink, and I'm leading IDC's European Financial Services Research. And many of you will have seen me speaking in some of our previous events. Today, I want to talk a bit about something a bit different. And by doing so, introducing IDC's new digital resiliency framework and kind of applying that to financial services and particularly the insurance and the banking sectors, for a matter of fact. And I think the message we really want to go into is that digital resiliency is not just a nice thing to have, but it is really a fundamental prerequisite to really prepare for the unknown. And for that fact, we really need to start thinking about how we can build digital resiliency into everything we do. I also want to put out a warm welcome and thanks to our sponsor, Red Hat, for this session. And let me jump right into the content for the next 20 minutes. So you probably have seen many of these cyclical curves over the last year. I mean, it's not a new theme eternally, and it also is not really important where we are at the moment. And I think we are at the moment in this interesting in-between when we look at COVID, when we are not sure, do we have the worst behind us? Are we just bracing for the next wave? And this is really fitting quite nicely with the theme or with the continuous volatility that we are expecting. And this is not just COVID, this is any crisis. And for those of you that have been in the industry for a long time, we are continuously experiencing these external shocks. Sometimes it's also homemade shocks, but the nature of business is that we have the cyclical movements, but still we often respond in the very same fashion, and that's not anti-cyclical, but it's absolutely cyclical. And that's what I wanted to show here. And for those of you who have listened to us before, these are the 5 stages that most organizations go through when we hit a crisis. And as you can see, the first 2, the focus is really on tactical responses and then focusing on cost optimization. And very often the measures taken in these 2 steps, on these 2 levels, are compounding, they are aggregating, they are making the crisis worse. And what we really should start thinking about, how can we build up this business resiliency upfront so that we do not fall into the same cyclical movements every time the going gets rough, and really build out that resiliency and continue with targeted investments to really future-proof our enterprise. And that's why we think that a digital resiliency framework will help organizations, and particularly financial service organizations, to prepare for the unknown and then react more in a strategic, in a more informed manner to respond to the many challenges that are coming up. And I think there is definitely no shortage of these critical issues coming up. So before I jump into the framework, I wanted to give a short overview of what I think really worked well in the last 24 months. And I think financial services, compared with many of the other industries, has fared relatively well throughout the crisis. But obviously, we have realized the world is even more interconnected than we thought. And the continuous pressures that do kind of affect this interconnected world, whether it's the chip shortages, whether it's the COVID restrictions, whether it's generally political pressure, and all those things make it even more difficult for financial institutions to move forward. But what we've also seen is that preparation really does pay off. And the FSI industry was an industry that was relatively well prepared, not for a pandemic, but generally the business continuity plans had been in place. And this really allowed them to very quickly shift into crisis mode. And that really set them up in a much better way than some of the other industries. We also learned throughout the crisis, and we've done countless surveys that has proven that or indicated that is that digital leaders with advanced digital processes and digital sales capabilities have proven a lot more resilient to the COVID crisis than many of the not so well prepared organizations. However, we also see at the same time that Europe is falling further and further behind their global peers, and profitability is becoming a real issue for European financial institutions. We also saw the rise of remote working. I think traditionally the industry was never conceptualized for it, and I was still impressed how seamlessly that shift of sending thousands of staff home worked when the first wave hit. But now we see a lot of banking leaders really backpedaling because they are not as satisfied with the benefits of remote working, and many are now pushing to get their staff back into the offices. So it is a lot more to it than just sending people home. It requires a lot of cultural change. It requires better digital tools. It requires much better performance management and KPIs to really get people to work effectively in this remote world. And this is really the key success also of hybrid models that we expect to continue as we come out of the crisis. We also realized how important the cloud is going. We've really seen a surge in cloud deployments over the last 18 months. And this has really given FSI a lot of flexibility, a lot more reliability, and the speed to adapt, even if a lot of their staff is limited because they are working from home. On the other hand, we obviously see a new slew of regulations, which do not necessarily make things more difficult, but it is going to be costly to implement that. And I'm just thinking about DORA, which is upcoming, but then also some European initiatives such as Gaia-X that are really aiming to standardize IT risk management and also increase the independence from some of the global tech firms. I think one area where I hear a lot of talk, but not a lot of work yet, is around credit quality. And frankly, the situation hasn't been as dire as many of us expected, most and foremost me, but we see how we still lack reliable data to really make smart credit decisions. And I think it's particularly true in the current environment when solvency rules are still suspended in some areas, where data reporting is not as it should be, and banks make credit decisions based on incomplete information. And what we really need to move beyond here is or what we need to move to is more diverse data, more predictive capabilities to really better prepare for the changes caused by external effects. So let me zoom in on digital resiliency. And let me start with a very simple definition. So digital resiliency really means the ability for an organization to rapidly adapt to business disruptions by leveraging digital capabilities to not only restore business operations, but also to capitalize on the changed conditions. And the reality of resiliency was that in the past, we looked at two different types of resiliency. There was business resiliency. We tried to build our revenue models where we tried to drive our sales and kind of keep our operations going. The other one is IT resiliency. And here we saw a lot more investment, obviously. But what is really missing is bringing those two resiliency initiatives together. That's exactly what digital resiliency means, is bringing all those different and fragmented and siloed initiatives together into a holistic framework. But it's a little bit more than that. And you may have seen this before. So resiliency really touches upon the entire organization. It's a bit like when we started off with talking about digital transformation. First, it was very tactical, very narrow initiatives. But then we realized in order to make it work, you really need it holistically. And that's what this digital resiliency framework is trying to establish. So digital resiliency affects 6 different dimensions. And so far, most organizations have not really looked at these 6 dimensions in detail, but maybe done a bit of piecemeal work here and there. But all those 6 dimensions really have to function in a concerted effort to really make digital resiliency work. And that also means bringing in different stages. I showed you this crisis wave before, and different capabilities throughout those different crisis stages to really enable organizations to respond and restore when crisis hits, but then at the same time, and not just with a time delay, expand and optimize operations. And also, while we are at it, not really drop the ball on acceleration and innovation. So all of that has to happen concurrently and not simultaneously and not concurrently anymore. So let me take you through some of the insights that we've found from some of the surveys that we've done. And I'll take you through all of those 6 dimensions. And here I wanted to focus on operations and customer and ecosystems. So operations clearly has received a lot of attention over the last couple of months. And I already mentioned how important cloud has become as a vehicle to really drive innovation and give organizations that flexibility and agility. 22% of FSI now plan to commit to a single cloud platform, while 38% aim to spread resources across several cloud offerings. So I think a lot of organizations still have this intrinsic fear of being locked in on a platform, and try to really hedge and also with an eye on resiliency, obviously hedge their bets on what happens if a platform goes down or whatever there are issues with a particular platform. However, only 5% at the moment say they aggressively leverage open source to prevent platform lock-in. So with open source, we really mean build using a shared open source framework to operate across different cloud platforms. Another key challenge that was identified around operations is the lack of real-time and actual performance data. And that's really is seen as a key obstacle to get more value out of automation initiatives by a quarter of the respondents. Another quarter identified the lack of a consistent end-to-end process and enterprise-wide control and visibility tools in operations. So a lot of potential for improvement and getting more value out of data. On the customer and ecosystems resiliency, we really hear from our banking customers that 23% are now improving seeing customer experience improvements as one of the top 3 priorities, only trumped by performance innovation. We also see that the understanding of the benefits of the ecosystem is now getting more tangible. I think in the past, we've talked a lot about open banking and open finance, but it was not really a strategic priority for a lot of organizations, and this is changing now. I think this collapse of the entire ecosystem in the early onslaught of the pandemic is now really, and then its resiliency as kind of allowing organizations to innovate at scale by partnering with organizations of the ecosystem has really demonstrated that quite impressively. So 33% of FSI look at ecosystems to share operational capabilities and expertise. And another quarter is also looking at them as a platform to enable data and information sharing. So key use cases around ecosystems clearly identified here. Let me move on to the next 2 dimensions. And brand reputation are essentially important criteria for success in a crisis environment. We really saw that many of the digital challenges really struggled in the early onslaught of the pandemic simply because their reputation and their brand was not as strong. And we saw this flight for quality sometimes also flight in terms of size when customers were moving deposits from challenges towards traditional organizations. And this one, I've focused a bit more on what insurers are saying. So 24% of insurers are saying that marketing and brand awareness are about their top 3 business priorities for 2021. And 81 of them report that digital investments directly impact their security and brand trust. So really essential stats here. On the workforce, I already touched a bit on that. So we really see how organizations have transformed their workforce. Obviously, hybrid working is the new reality. And 48% of insurers now see how this is one of the key drivers of work transformation. So particularly compliance, growth, and customer experience are critical drivers here. We also saw that it is very easy to fall back into the old ways. So we did a survey in March 2021, and at that time, 60% of insurers in Europe were saying that their staff was working from home. But then when we asked them how they would expect this number to look like in 2022, this percentage dropped to almost 0%. So really see how an industry is set in its ways, bringing people back to the office, despite all the progress that was made around digital working, remote working over the last couple of years, a couple of months. And this is really essential to see that we are stuck in our old ways. And I think digital resiliency means not also to fall back into old behaviors when the situation is changing. Lastly, I wanted to talk about leadership and financial performance. And I think these are two really critical ones because they really hold the entire piece together. And when we ask banking leaders about what are the top 3 challenges when it comes to leadership, I was really surprised when 17 of them were saying that senior management really lacks a strategic vision, and 24% felt that leaders do not really support customer experience enough. We also found that only 23% of banking leaders are proactively driving process transformation, while 37% deal with any process inefficiencies once they are identified or when they become too big to ignore. But what really shocked me was that 40% more or less didn't really bother about it. So operational process transformation is an issue that's not really considered much on the C-level level, but very often those initiatives are housed much further down. The other component obviously is around financial management. I think I already talked to that point when I talked about the workforce. So many of the bank CEOs that were very vocal about the benefits or the disadvantages of remote working identified performance issues as one of the key disadvantages of remote working. And that also really leads to the fact that 62% of banks now see performance as the most important business priority in 2021, and that almost doubled from 2019. So when we look at banks, we still see organizations that navigate on very old data. So only 19% of agile banks have now switched to really continuously adjusting budgets based on new data. But still, most of this data is largely periodical. So quarterly, if it's good, usually even longer timeframes, and only really a handful of organizations do this adjustments of budgeting on the go. So we really need to change the way we steer our organizations based on data to really get better insights. And we need to make many of the data points that are collected, need to transform them in something that's more actionable to really give back value to the organization. That already brings me to the end of my session. Just a couple of thoughts and our recommendations. So COVID-19 has really taught us that digitally advanced FSI are more resilient than those that are not. And this really has accelerated the digital transformation pressure on a lot of organizations. What's clear is the future will continue to be volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And most importantly, it will be increasingly digital. To really operate in this new economy, we need to rethink resiliency in a holistic manner. And that means combining and aligning business and IT resiliency. We talked about the cloud. I think cloud will continue to be a most essential component of an FSI's resiliency strategy. It is important to really avoid some of the errors of the past around concentration risk and vendor lock-in, and I think a lot of organizations are trying to deal with that, yet not enough of them are really considering open source as an essential capability to give them that flexibility and performance across a multitude of different operating environments. And I think this is really an area where Red Hat can deliver a lot of value through their platforms and really help organizations to really navigate and orchestrate across different operating environments. And lastly, too many organizations are operating based on tactical plans rather than a fact-based transformational strategy. Decision makers too often lack a clear vision, but more essentially, they are acting on outdated and ineffective data. So what we really need to get to is a more actionable real-time data that will be the key to build a genuine agile organization. With that, many thanks for your attention, and over to our partners from Red Hat. Thank you very much.
Hello, I am Monica Sasso, and I am Red Hat's EMEA Financial Services Chief Technologist based in London. Before joining Red Hat, I spent most of my career in the big banks, delivering large regulatory and digital transformations on a global scale at firms like RBS, Barclays, and Coutts. I also helped build a new data center for a regional UK bank nationwide, acted as the head of change for smaller asset and investment management firms, and was a director at Deutsche Bank. At Deutsche, I delivered MiFID II globally for wealth management, as well as PSD2 and GDPR. So I'm au fait with the operational constraints you all face day in, day out. I made the move into tech from the banks in early 2020, 4 weeks before the pandemic sent me to my kitchen office. Because I felt like I could have more of an impact on changing the industry from the outside than I could from within. Not to sound cliched, I'm quite passionate about making sure the next generation has access to the best financial advice and products available, and that these products are accessible to all. So today we're talking about digital resiliency. Resiliency is a big topic at the minute, ranging from liquidity requirements following the 2008 credit crunch to business continuity post-pandemic. And coupled with advances in technology, these shifts are forcing a revolution in how we think about banking more broadly. I do believe, though, that banks have shown huge amounts of resilience just by still being here. When one hears the term digital resiliency, it's easy to immediately start thinking about resilience in terms of technology, and then IT estate's ability to recover from difficulties, spring back into shape, or to be elastic. But it's a lot harder to think about culture or an organization or an operation or even a strategy as resilient. The people, process, and strategy elements are hugely important, as Thomas has discussed. And before I expand a bit on that, I always like to start with a glance backwards to history. After all, banks and financial services institutions are some of the most resilient industries, rather industries that are tough because they have been around a long time. They have served us through wars, famine, economic booms and busts, incredible technological advancements, and even pandemics, more than just this one. So in researching the history of banking and economics in Portugal for this talk today, I learned that during the Renaissance period, Portugal was the world's economic power, introducing most of Africa and the East to Europe. In the same period, Portugal also established a multi-continental trading system extending from Japan to Brazil, or rather, the first real instance of globalization. It was around this time that banking had spread from northern Italy throughout the Holy Roman Empire, and bartering gave way to money. So the Banco de Portugal, or the Banco de Lisboa, I apologize for the poor pronunciation, was established in 1821 and is still one of the oldest banks in continuous operation in the world today, along with the likes of Banque de France, Citibank, and the Nederlandsche Bank, which is actually the precursor to the Dutch bank was the Amsterdam Wisselbank, which was the first central bank in the world. That's pretty good company to be in. I also spent some time on the Banco de Portugal Money Museum's website, which if you've never been to, you should definitely have a look at. And it posted something about what it believes its role in educating people is. That I think we in technology and firms and is what our consumers forget: the role of money in the life of citizens. So the image on the left was used for an advert for an event this summer called The History of Banking, showcasing the longevity of banking in Portugal. And you can get a feel for just how old this image depicting a banking transaction is. The second image is actually called The Money Changer and His Wife, and it lives at the Louvre in Paris. Given Princess Isabella of Portugal's role in developing prosperous trade and finance activities in the court of Flanders, which was the richest European court at the time, no doubt her legacy can be felt in this Renaissance oil painting from 1514 by the Flemish Renaissance artist Quentin Matisse. All of this makes me think that banking as an institution in Portugal is already quietly resilient, given the heritage and long traditions of commerce and its ethos that it plays a role in the lives of its citizens. But digital resiliency is also about people, culture, and technology being buoyant. I love the way that IDC stated in their Digital Resiliency Framework for the Future Enterprise paper that firms need to move from responding to adapting. Having spent most of my career at the banks delivering regulatory and digital change initiatives, I know how hard it is just to be able to even respond, much less adapt. The regulations, your consumers' expectations, the histories of mergers and acquisitions, including people in tech, and your shareholders' demands. So in thinking about how best to start talking about resiliency and adapting in the context of technology and ways of working, I went hunting for some images that would show what adaptability really means in the context of organizational change. And I was surprised how many of them have their roots in systems engineering, because for them, it's all about design for changeability. And that dovetails with the best definition of adaptability that I was able to find that resonates to me with most financial institutions. And that's the quality of being able to adjust to new conditions, the capacity to be modified for a new use or purpose. So it got me thinking about how much, when I think about how much financial services have changed in the last 35 years, much less 200, I look back at my own life. I remember getting all dressed up and going into a branch with my parents to open a bank account as a little girl when I was 8. It was a privilege. Fast forward 32 years to 2018, and I opened a bank account in the UK on my phone from the backseat of a taxi in Austria. And that illustrates that banks have shifted from being that trusted heritage brand to providing real-time engagement, convenient services, and are shifting to becoming platform economies in their own rights. Those that adapt to customer demands will continue to thrive. That service I consumed from the backseat of the taxi was an old service that was modified or had evolved because someone at a startup was empowered to think outside the box, to collaborate, as illustrated by the umbrella picture, to be innovative, and to fail in an environment that encouraged all of those things. The next generation of consumers are not as sticky. They are not as loyal, and there are rules that make it very easy to move accounts from bank to bank. They are truly digitally native. They spend their money based on their morals, and they do not think, like 8-year-old Monica did, that to have a bank account is an honor. They think it's a right and everyone should have one. They're okay with failing and starting again at speed, and they expect us to be the same, no matter how uncomfortable it may feel to some of us. The images with the bridges and the cars illustrate my experience at some of the banks that I've worked in, and that I see when I speak with customers across EMEA. Some cars are moving faster than others across the bridge, and some maybe haven't even packed up yet to start the journey, or maybe have started the journey and didn't pack up, or they didn't fill the fuel tank with the fuel. So, i.e., maybe they didn't have a strategy to modernize or a strategy to evolve, or for example, they just started moving across the bridge without a digital transformation and cloud strategy. I know that when I was in the throes of delivering MiFID II at Deutsche Wealth, and my team was busy delivering PSD2 and GDPR at the same time for Deutsche Wealth, all I did was adapt. But I adapted so the bank could respond. And only my boss and the global head of legal risk and compliance clocked onto what was happening. I was trying to get the bank to adapt rather than just respond to the new rules in a very black and white way. I know so many people like me who really want to be at the center of this shift and are struggling with how to help. which is why when I came across this infographic, it made me think actually understanding how you operate in respond mode is also a good way to learn about how to operate in an adapt mode. I think this concept of adapting is so powerful and required for banks to continue to be the long-standing, trusted institutions that have protected our money and livelihoods for centuries. And it requires a different kind of consideration, a different kind of conversation than ever before. It requires a holistic view of resilience from within the bank, and equally a collaboration with regulators and shareholders to accept that things will change and maybe be more flexible. It sounds mad, me saying flexibility and regulators and shareholders in the same sentence. But I think we're at a turning point in the world where we could be more principles-led rather than black and white rules-led to enable this. If I talk to my 70-year-old father about experimenting and failing fast and not having a top-down rigid hierarchy, as a man who used to own and run a medium-sized construction company, he would laugh and say something like, "I see your master's degree was money well spent." I scoff. I make fun of my dad because it's easy. He knows that the business world has moved on since 1978. But those leaders that still cling to the enemies of adaptability will probably struggle to be resilient in their ways of working and operations, thus being unable to capitalize on their technology investments or showcase true digital resiliency. And going back to my boring old MiFID II stories, I remember when I was preparing briefings for the FCA in the UK and the BaFin in Germany, the differences in approaches was mind-boggling. It's the same across Europe, but I do wonder if a principle-led approach is something that will proliferate more when the EU regulation on digital operational resilience, or DORA, and the EBA rules on outsourcing enter into force. These are not nearly as prescriptive as GDPR or MiFID or mere transaction reporting, for example, but just as wide-reaching. So this means that to thrive and adapt to the regulations, firms need to adopt some sort of technology or resilient cloud-like infrastructure, organizational structure, and ways of working to deliver software to keep up with consumer demands. So how can you use your technology and systems to drive digital resilience in your firm and also be compliant with the operational resilience, business continuity, and exit elements of the upcoming law changes? And in the process, set your firms up to be truly agile so you can remain competitive and attract the next generation of technologists and consumers. Well, we think the first step is to design your technology for operational resilience, business continuity, and exit, so you can articulate your resilience to your regulators and your shareholders. So what does that mean, designing for operational resilience? If we look at a possible example way of how you can start to think about designing for operational resilience, the first thing is to identify the important business services processes, to address the vulnerabilities or do a risk assessment essentially against those processes, and to assess the effectiveness of your controls, of your mitigations, to get a clear view of what your operation actually looks like. And then moving on to how can we start to think about designing for business continuity and exit. This is a difficult one because it's all about designing for options. The regulators have not been prescriptive on how to design an IT service to demonstrate compliance. Instead, they have given lots of different options or different possibilities that you can do. So therefore, we think a framework such as this could be a very useful way to think about all of the options that are available to your firms with a view of your firm's risk tolerance, your future in business, IT strategies, and things like that. But some of the options that the regulators have given us are a hybrid cloud, for example, retaining the ability to bring data or applications back on-prem to your own data center, having multiple data centers spread across multiple regions or in different availability zones, for example, or having multiple or backup vendors. These are some of the options that they have articulated. The challenge is that each option has pros and cons. And the following examples crystallize the need for a thorough analysis with a view of your firm's risk appetite and reality, frankly. The first one is data sovereignty. This has to be considered when you think about multi-region data portability of personal data. That could put data sovereignty at risk. Having the technical ability to migrate workloads quickly between clouds or true portability that doesn't require refactoring is another consideration. Another element that has to be considered is that firms have to model are plausible IT operational scenarios, such as a bug appearing in a common service that could make multiple availability zones a very risky proposition, could take down an entire data center. And the least fun one of all to consider is contracts and vendor lock-in, especially because stressed exits need to be modeled and catered for. And there is not a single regulator that really cares about a firm's commercial position with A, B, and C IT suppliers. So the more that we speak with our clients in EMEA, the more that we learn that their digital transformations and journey to being more resilient are more like evolutions rather than revolutions. And in order to be successful, they have to impact the organization at 360 degrees, meaning not only technology, but also processes, people, organizational structure, and culture. And they need to be adaptable and flexible, not only for the next generation of consumers, but also employees and technologists. So thank you for your time today, and I look forward to speaking with all of you in a bit.